we do have a couple of people that are watching via Zoom. Thomas App, you'll hear more about him a little later today. Stacy Spells from Project Longevity in New Haven, Connecticut, and Brother James Wynn from our sister DART organization, BREAD, and they are all via Zoom, and there may be some others that are there as well. We'll acknowledge their presence later. And last but not least, we have many of our RISC members and others that are watching via our Zoom attendance. And okay, all right. And I'd like to take this moment to ask everyone who is in our Zoom to sign in. So if you're looking through our Zoom, we want you to sign in today. There is a Google form, and we want you to go ahead and sign that and put that in, and then email it to ian@riscrichmond.org so we can make sure we have all of your attendance today as well. So we're thankful that you came out to share with us today and to hear and to listen. And hopefully today we can let you kind of understand what we're talking about and kind of what we think is one of the first steps that needs to happen to begin to reduce gun violence in the Richmond area. Who are we? We're RISC. As I said earlier, I want to welcome you to Second Baptist Church. And we are, at Second Baptist, one of the member congregations of RISC, which stands for Richmonders Involved to Strengthen Our Communities. We are a justice ministry organization made up of 22 diverse places of worship from around the city. We love our city, and we wish to reclaim it for what we know it was intended to be. Richmond is a place with a horrific history. Our organization, RISC, is a vehicle by which we can begin to address the effects of this horrific racial history, being it was the capital of the Confederacy. So how does this work in a nutshell, and how do we at RISC work? We want to kind of let you know about us. Some of you may know about us and may know some stuff you think you know. So we want to make sure you're clear. What we do at RISC, the first thing we do is we go through what's called a listening process, where we listen to what other members are having problems with and what injustices are affecting their lives. And we do that through 50 or so house meetings around the city. We listen to what the community is telling us. And the reason in 2019 we began to talk about gun violence is because that's what we were hearing was on the rise in our house meetings. So that's when we began to take it on. It's not that gun violence wasn't a problem before, but in our house meetings, the community was telling us back early in 2019 that they were seeing gun violence go on the rise. So what do? We decided by a vote which to take on, and gun violence won the vote. We research and come up with a specific winnable solution that makes sense. And then we hold our annual Nehemiah Action, and that's normally in the spring. And we held it last year, and we had 2,004 members attend our action on Zoom. And at this action, what we do is we hold our officials accountable, and we ask them if they will implement our winnable solution. Now, we need to make sure everyone's clear. We have all the receipts to prove this. We always meet with officials beforehand and go over with them exactly how the action will go and what questions we will ask. And because a lot of times we go back and we have to fight and argue over the question before the action. So no one has ever asked a question that they did not know was going to happen. We know there are different narratives out there about who we are and what we do, but let's be clear. This is who we are. We are an organization of the community, exercising our power of large numbers as organized people, but we're always respectful, and we always let you know what our cards are before we play them. Look, so let me read from Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail to kind of give you our perspective and understand how we roll. This is Martin Luther King. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent, direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring it to the surface, and we bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open, where it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered, but must be open with all of its ugliness to the natural medicine of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension it exposes creates to the light of human conscience, and the air of the national opinion before it can be cured. So our job is normally to just bring it to the surface, because you can't deal with the problem if you keep it hidden. So yes, We, the leaders and members of risk, are not the creators of tension. In this case, the tension is already in the streets. The tension we ought to be mad about is what's laying bodies down all over our city. That's the tension that we ought to be upset about. Today, we bring that tension to the natural medicine of air and light. And with that, I want to turn it over to Pastor Don Coleman from Eastern Fellowship. He's going to give you a recap and give you some understanding about what our gun violence prevention campaign has been all about.
Thank you, Pastor Hodge. And I mean, in a moment, can we feel that tension? Can we go ahead and feel that tension? Because this is what this is about. It's when a 10-year-old walks outside to see his neighbor lying dead in the street. That tension is there when a mother opens the front door and there's a police officer who's there to tell her her child is dead. That tension is there in the hearts and minds of those who daily live with the fear that they or one of their loved ones might be the next victim. As Pastor Hodge described, we at Risk start our process by listening. And these were the kind of stories we heard for our last Nehemiah action last spring. So at this point now, we want to play a video, again, to just draw us in to the human reality of this issue.
Okay, hi, I'm Maurice. About a year ago, in 2019, I lost my best friend, and he was murdered when I was actually 2 minutes from pulling up at his house. You know, I was supposed to be with him, and by the grace of God, I wasn't. But you know, he had been struggling for a while with being in the streets, and actually both of us were out there with the same struggle together, and he ended up losing his life for being in the wrong environments, basically. A month after he lost his life, I actually was around 2 more of my friends, and as the guns was drawn on them, I actually backed up and ran off and got away from that as they was murdered. And I was there with the police as they died. And what we're advocating for, this program, I believe, could have deterred their lives and as well as mine much sooner. And I may not have been in the environments that I was in. And I really think this program will help a lot.
My name is Kristen. I am a risk member from Eastern Fellowship. My story is 2 years ago. My daughter, who was 8 at the time, and I were taking clothes to a family friend. While we were taking clothes to a family friend, we were turning into the complex, and a car that had the right-of-way waved us in to go first. I thought it was odd because they had the right-of-way and I was on the opposite side of the street. But I went ahead, waved my hand, and went in anyway. My daughter and I proceeded to take the bags out of the car to take to our friend's house. And before we could finish, that same car that waved us in opened fire and bullets were everywhere. My daughter was up ahead of me and she went down while we were running. My instant thought was that she had been shot and I didn't know what to do. I just remember grabbing her and dragging her to my friend's door. Once we were banging on the door, we finally got in because she was scared as well. The gentleman that was the target bum rushed his way into the door as well because it was an open door just to be safe. The bullets went through his body. I remember being able to see clearly through the shoulder. There was blood everywhere. My daughter was screaming, and I was just trying to call 911 and get the police there. Once the police came, they saw him in the hallway, and I remember one cop specifically saying, "What'd you do to get yourself into this mess?" to the victim. I didn't realize that my daughter had been grazed by a bullet. A bullet went through her coat, and there was a lot of interrogation. After that, no one asked, were we okay? Nobody asked how we got here, if we lived there. Nobody checked on any of the other kids in the house. The house that we were in had another 4-year-old child in there as well. About 2 to 3 hours later, I stood up and someone told me that I had blood on the back of my leg. I thought it could have been from the gentleman that was shot or just my daughter or anyone, but actually I had been grazed by a bullet as well. We ended up going to the hospital, both getting stitches, and now we have physical scars as well as emotional scars. The only thing I could think of was how I could get my daughter help. She wasn't sleeping. She slept with that same coat with the bullet hole under her pillow for at least 6 months. Some facilities and places that I called to try to get her counseling had wait lists. Some as long as 3 years, some as short as 6 months. That right there made me angry. Because who's going to help people when things like this happen? After a couple weeks of investigation, the police informed me that the person that was shot that day was in the hospital for at least 2 months trying to recover. It also turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. He didn't live in Richmond. He was a junior in college and class president of his college. My story isn't the only story, and this story isn't my only story. There are thousands of stories like this in the neighborhood, your neighbors, your friends, your church members, people that don't speak about it. Something needs to be done.
Needs to be done. To my right here, for those of you in the room, lives lost to gun violence in Richmond. We at Risk, it's what we try to do. Once we voted, we began working on this terrible problem. We did a lot of research. And while we found that there was, and there still are, and people are in this room here in Richmond with great prevention efforts that they're going about, what we didn't find was a comprehensive movement, focused, targeted, and aimed at stopping the problem in the short term. We came across a field called focused deterrence, and in particular, a program called Group Violence Intervention, or GVI. Thomas Apt, who's be with us today, will fill us in later about that specific program. But what struck us was this, and I'm a native Richmonder. What struck me was the results. Where GVI has been implemented in other cities across our country, in cities similar to Richmond, it works. It has cut homicides in half, in some places, even more, in cities very similar to us. We have been calling upon our city to move forward with getting a proven evidence-based program here in Richmond for the last year and a half. And what we mean by that is that we contract with national experts, people who know what they're doing because they've done it with success before. The first step is something called a problem analysis, details of which we'll talk about more today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Coleman. And like Pastor Coleman said, the first step in any successful gun violence intervention program is a rigorous problem analysis. Let me say that again. The first step, and what we do, always has to start with a rigorous problem analysis. And so we're going to talk more about that today. But just for some housekeeping, if you're on Zoom, we do want you to make sure that you checked in, sign our Google form, and then email it back, because we want to make sure we have a record of everyone that is with us on Zoom, because we do thank you for pausing during your day to share with us and join us virtually. We now want to introduce Dr. Thomas Apt to you all. We've had a great pleasure meeting with him over at least 3 times over the last year and a half. And he has greatly helped us understand the problem of violent crime and the proven solutions that are out here. We have several other people that are with him today that are going to share as well, but I'll first introduce him. Dr. Apt is the chair of the Violent Crime Working Group of the Council of Criminal Justice. Prior to joining the council, Mr. Apt served as senior research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School and held leadership positions at the New York Governor's Office and Office of Justice Programs at the U.S. Department of Justice. Thomas Apt is the author of Bleeding Out, The Devastating Consequences of Urban Violence and a Bold New Plan for Peace in the Streets, published in 2019. He has a lot of very, very relevant information to share. And without further ado, I'm going to ask that Mr. Apt be joined with us, and I will mute my mic so we can hear him clearly.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today and to be back in front of RISC, which I'm so impressed with, taking an active interest in saving lives and stopping violence in their community. I'm going to go through a short presentation. I'm going to try to go through it quickly. We may not get to all the slides in the 15 minutes I have, but they'll be probably made available. So if you want to look at them at another time, you can do so. So I just want to begin with a metaphor. Imagine yourself as a trauma surgeon working late at night in an emergency room in Richmond, and a young man has been rolled in on a gurney. He's unconscious and he's been shot. And in fact, he's losing a lot of blood. The bullet that is in his leg has clipped the femoral artery, which is one of the largest blood vessels in the body. And he's losing a lot of blood quickly. So the question is, what do you do? Or maybe the better question is, what do you do first? The young man, his clothes look old and worn, so he might be jobless, he might be homeless, he might be lacking an education. So maybe the first thing you need to do is to help him get a job, help him find an apartment, help him earn his GED. On the other hand, the young man may have been involved in some kind of violent conflict, and when he regains consciousness, he might be dangerous. So maybe the first thing you need to do is put him in restraints or alert hospital security or even call 911. I would suggest that none of us would do any of these things, and instead we would do the only sensible, moral, humane thing that's available to us at the time, which is the very first thing we would do is we would stop the bleeding to save the young man's life. Because unless we stop the bleeding, nothing else matters. And so that's really the argument I want to make here today, is that we need to treat community gun violence like a gunshot wound. And we need to treat it with that same level of urgency and intensity. And so I'm going to talk to you today. My talk is going to be organized along the lines of how someone is treated in the emergency room. We'll go through triage to diagnosis to treatment and then ultimately to prognosis. So triage is all about putting first things first, either in the emergency room or on the battlefield. And so I want to make the case for the importance of addressing community gun violence. As many of you may know, homicides increased 29% from 2019 to 2020, and they're up in 2021 as well. Richmond, unfortunately, is no exception to this and has seen a large increase in community gun violence and homicides as well. Obviously, the costs of a homicide are incalculable to the victim, their friends, and family. But for the broader community, the costs are incredibly high, costing approximately anywhere from 10 to 19 million in criminal justice, medical costs, and other costs. And most homicides are associated with community gun violence, the phenomenon that we're talking about here today. Since 9/11, there's been hundreds who have died in terrorist attacks and mass shootings, and all of that is terrible, tragic. But more than 100,000 people have died due to the everyday, routine, deadly community violence that happens across the country and in Richmond. It's also important to realize that this problem doesn't equally impact all citizens. It disproportionately impacts the poor and powerless in society. Black men comprise less than 7% of the population, but more than 50% of homicide victims. And homicide was the leading cause of death among young Black men and boys. And it causes more deaths than the 9 other leading causes combined, which is a truly sobering statistic. It's also important to understand that for those who survive violence, it's deeply traumatic. It traumatizes entire communities, making every aspect of social and economic development more difficult. But perhaps its most profound impact may be on poor children. What we know is that holding all other things constant, keeping everything equal, that poor children who are exposed to violence have much worse outcomes than poor children who grow up peacefully. And as the pioneering research of Roz Chetty and Pat Sharkey shows, converging evidence shows that exposure to violence may be the primary mechanism affecting the life chances of children. Simply put, exposure to violence can trap children in a cycle of poverty. Now that's the argument for triage, for dealing with this issue urgently. Now let's diagnose the problem so that we can treat it. I want to rely on some of the evidence that's cited in my book, Bleeding Out, about urban violence, that's based on a massive systematic meta-review that synthesized the results of over 1,400 impact evaluations, but was also supplemented by real in-your-face conversations with people who had lived experience with violence: cops, community members, former gang members, former shooters, mothers who had lost children, and others. And interestingly, no matter where they were from, overall, a clear story emerged, although people told the story in their own language. And we learned some key facts about this phenomenon of community violence. The first thing was that community violence is extraordinarily sticky, meaning that it concentrates among a surprisingly small number of people, places, and behaviors. Most violence concentrates among small numbers of hot people. That's a term that some in the field use. And you can see the statistics here for New Orleans and across the country. Most violence also concentrates in specific hot spots, which are not whole neighborhoods, but micro locations, a given given housing project, a certain liquor store, a certain nightclub on a certain night. And then finally, violence in hot spots carried out by hot people is usually facilitated by a few key hot or high-risk behaviors, such as illegal gun carrying. Now, it might not surprise you to know that if the problem of community gun violence is so sticky, then sticky solutions seem to work best. These highly focused solutions that work only on the highest risk people, places, and behaviors. This is true for policing, gang prevention, reentry. It's true all across criminal justice, but it's true across public health as well. Now, you might wonder whether displacement, meaning if you focus on one block, does crime move down the street? Or if you focus on one group, does crime just go to another group? We have over 30 years of research on this, and fortunately, displacement might be a small concern. But the research tells us that generally speaking, crime is not displaced, and that if you focus on these people, places, and behaviors, you can have big results. So that first fundamental of anti-violence reduction is focus. The second fundamental is balance. And this is something we found in our research. And it's common sense. Human beings respond to both rewards and punishments, incentives and disincentives. Every parent knows this. And what we see across the policy spectrum is good research supporting both public health and criminal justice approaches that are focused on prevention and approaches that are focused on deterrence and incapacitation. And so you need both. And what we've seen across the country is that there is no city that has simply arrested their way out of the problem, but there's also no city that has simply programmed their way out of the problem. You must have a combination of carrots and sticks to change people's behavior. The third fundamental is something that I think we're all aware of in this sort of national crisis of confidence that we're going through with the American criminal justice system. Community violence is closely connected to legitimacy. And what that means is that, generally speaking, less fairness leads to more violence. And we know this from a few different bodies of research. We know from the research around procedural justice that lack of trust and confidence in law enforcement results in less compliance and more violence. We know from the body of work around legal cynicism that when communities don't believe in the criminal justice system, they withdraw from it, taking justice into their own hands, often violently so. And we also know that legitimacy isn't just a matter of fairness. It's not just a matter of refraining from illegal, arbitrary, or brutal treatment. It's also about doing the job of keeping people safe. And so it's important to understand that whatever is done in the name of violence reduction must be perceived to be fair and legitimate by impacted individuals and communities. So that's the diagnosis. In order to be successful in reducing community gun violence, you must be focused, balanced, and fair. Now let's look to treatment. Generally speaking, I divide the approaches that we need to do into people, place, and behavior-based approaches. If there's a small number of people, places, and behaviors that are causing the violence, or the majority of the violence, then we need people, place, and behavior-based approaches to address it. And here are some of the things that the most effective people and place and behavior-based strategies do. The first is for people-based strategies that you identify those who are most at risk, and then you engage them. And once they're engaged, you stabilize them by providing them with safety and security. And once they're stabilized, you work on their unhealthy thinking and unsafe behaviors. You often address their untreated trauma that makes them hypervigilant and often leads to poor decision-making. And then once they're stabilized and treated, then you can start offering educational and employment opportunities when they're in a position to actually make the most of them. And then, unfortunately, we have to acknowledge that some people who refuse to change and refuse to stop engaging in violent behavior need to be punished with swift and certain sanctions. For place-based approaches, working on those hotspots, yes, it's important to invest in policing and increase police presence in and around those locations. But it can't just be policing. You also have to invest in those locations with placemaking, cleaning and greening, improving street lights, taking care of the physical environment, removing trash on a regular basis, all kinds of things to improve the overall ecological health of that location. And then you need to supplement that policing and placemaking with community building. Yes, we need community building on the broadest sense. We need it across the nation, across Virginia, across Richmond, but we need to build micro communities in and around these hotspots. Police community partnerships with businesses and others, people who have an immediate stake in the health of that area. And then finally, we need to be a little bit more focused in our behavior-based approaches. Yes, we have massive challenges with guns, gangs, and drugs, but dealing with those in the most general way has not been particularly successful in reducing community violence because it's too overbroad. And so in order to enhance effectiveness, we need to reframe these issues as not as things, but as behaviors that facilitate violence. So don't think of guns, think about what are we going to do about gun carrying in and among the highest risk people in the highest risk places. Don't think about gangs, think about what are we going to do about gang banging among the highest risk people in the highest risk places, and so on. I want to talk to you a little bit about one strategy that really exemplifies a lot of these principles of focus, balance, and fairness, and is doing a lot of these things right, and that's focus deterrence. What you see on the right is a summary of all of the various studies that have been done in this area. And you don't need to go through this log chart in any detail or to understand it. The point is that when I'm talking about the body of evidence in surrounding focus deterrence, I'm not talking about one city or two cities. I'm talking about 24 cities, all of which there were rigorous quasi-experimental studies evaluating the impacts. And in 19 of those 24 cities or studies, there were noteworthy crime reduction effects. And in fact, of the ones that focused specifically on gang and group violence, 12 out of 12 were effective. You don't need to know what a 0.657 effect size means, but generally speaking, what it means is that this doesn't just work, but it works powerfully, meaning it can achieve reductions in gun violence of 30, 40, 50, 60%. Oakland ceasefire is a good example where over a period of 6 years, they cut gun violence by 50%. There's success stories in New Haven, as you're going to hear from, Cincinnati, Boston, and lots of other places around the country. It's not perfect. And one thing that's important to understand is that this strategy, if done well, is likely to reduce gun violence. But if you don't do it well, if you don't implement it effectively, then it won't. And so it's not just enough to pick the right program, it has to be implemented well. So what's the prognosis? The prognosis is that to succeed, cities need to be able to put these principles and programs together. They need to use all these principles, and they need to coordinate these people, placed, and behavior-based strategies. They have to be balanced with prevention and enforcement, and they should bring multiple stakeholders together, not just public safety, but also public health and others. So the big question is, are cities capable of doing this? Sounds like a lot of work, and it sounds quite complicated. And the answer is, yes, they can, if they proceed one step at a time. So I just want to focus here on the first two steps, and we'll skip over the rest, but the slides are in the presentation. The first step is agreeing on core principles. If everybody's not on the same page, more or less, it's going to be very hard for the work to succeed later on. And so the first thing you need to do is define the problem. And I believe that you need to define the problem as narrowly as possible. And here I have a sample definition. You don't have to use this definition, but something like it may be helpful. Defining the problem as lethal and potentially lethal violence committed in public spaces as measured by homicides and shootings with injury. And then once you have an agreement on the problem, you need to agree on the general values that will guide the solution. And here I believe we need to be both evidence and community informed, meaning that we need to draw on the best data and evidence available to us at the time. And we also need to give voice to impacted individuals and communities at all stages of the decision-making and policy-making process. And then I want to talk about the second step, which is extremely important, which is if you're serious about reducing gun violence, you have to understand it. And you can't understand it in a general way. You have to understand it in a specific, concrete way. And so to do that, you need to perform a problem analysis, which will identify in the most specific and concrete terms the key people, places, and behaviors driving violence. And you do that using gang and group audits, homicide reviews, social network analysis, and crime mapping. And ultimately what you want is a short, specific list of specific people and specific addresses to focus on. And one of the things that's interesting is because gun violence is so concentrated, that list is going to be surprisingly short. And it will be surprisingly achievable to focus on those people and places. This has to blend quantitative and qualitative information, and it's got to focus on the proximate causes, like illegal gun carry, and not the root causes of violence. From there, you need to put a plan into action. You need to implement that plan. And ultimately, you need to evaluate it. These approaches don't require new laws or big budgets or even major institutional reforms. They can be done right now. There's a lot of federal funding under the American Recovery Plan that's available, and more funding is on the way. So there is funding available to do these things. And so my recommendation to you is to follow these steps in sequence for the greatest likelihood of success and to get started right away. Thank you.
We want to thank Dr. App for that wonderful presentation. He's just going to get us started. I'm now going to introduce Ms. Tiffany Garner, who is here today in person with us, who is from the Gifford Law Center. She's based in Woodbridge, Virginia, and we at RISC have had several opportunities to meet with her as well as her colleague, Mike McLively, several times. Of course, Giffords is one of the most reputable organizations in our country, really researching what works to prevent and intervene in gun violence. Tiffany will also bring in Stacy Spell, who is the director of a successful GBI program called Project Longevity in New Haven, Connecticut. Tiffany.
You know,
Do you need a microphone?
no, I'm totally good. Good afternoon, everyone. I paused because I was like, this podium is right here in my face. So and used to some places where the podium's adjustable, but I'll work with this. So anyway, that's all good. I was like, okay, it's all good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I bring you all greetings from Giffords Law Center. We're based, actually, we're in two locations. My main office is based out in California, and I'm on the East Coast. Obviously, I'm in Woodbridge, Virginia. We also have a DC office, which is where I'm based out of. My role at Giffords, I work as Community Violence Initiatives Manager, which is where I work in several states trying to advocate primarily for funding to address community violence programs, which includes cities that implement from GVI or Cure Violence or other programs to support gun violence reduction strategies. Some of the states that I cover, just kind of giving you guys an overview before I bring in my fantastic colleague, Stacy. Some of the states I cover is North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Maryland. I have done some work in Connecticut and now I'm branching into DC. But again, this is all, this is all to try to see what we can do to advocate and to push this issue before policymakers and those who are making decisions to make sure they're doing the work, getting funding into the hands of people who can implement these programs, right? So such as what Thomas has just talked about when it comes to group violence intervention. Before I even share with you all some of the work that we have done at Giffords around creating a report called A Case Study in Hope, which highlights programs or cities that were implementing group violence intervention, but mainly started off with Oakland, such as what Thomas just mentioned. But I want to first just share with you all, this has already been such a touching program because I can recall prior to my time at Giffords doing the work around community violence where I have seen it in person as a social worker, working as a counselor back in North Carolina, seeing that intersection of community violence, listen to that young lady talk about what that traumatic experience was like for her. But seeing that intersection of community violence and domestic violence and knowing we have to do something because our children are watching. We all know the children see within the home as well as in the streets. What is that going to look like for the next generation? So I'm encouraging you all as a person who formerly worked on trauma individually, but now advocate at a state level too. So please, we got to do something. We've got to save our babies' lives, right? And adults as well, but our children, I just have a special knack for that. Also wanted to share with you all, so Giffords, and perhaps we can make this link in this report available to you all. A few years ago, 2017, prior to my time at Giffords, one of my colleagues, Mike McLivy, our research team put together a report called A Case Study in Hope, where it highlighted what Oakland did to help reduce their violence and cut their homicides in half using a a group violence intervention strategy. One of the things that we noticed with and just giving you guys just a highlight of why this is so important before we talk a little bit about how New Haven implements their program. So one of the things we noticed with them is in Oakland, there were several partner organizations that came together because they realized between 1999 and 2003, their homicides were climbing 81%, right? And what was going on in the city? So a number of measures happened where, of course, one of the first strategies was always to increase law enforcement, increase officers. So there was a ballot measure to even try to, increase funding to, increase law enforcement officers on staff. But everyone realized within the city, that's not the answer. It's not the sole answer. It's to increase law enforcement and to increase arrest. I think oftentimes in our society and in our country, sometimes we think that incarceration is the way, but we know that those who are oftentimes incarcerated come out more hardened and not all, but some can increase in the violence. So what Oakland did, they decided to come together with some other partner organizations and decide that we've got to look at something else. What's something that could really work? What is some of the evidence that was pointing out there researchers were looking into? So through a measure of research and studies, Oakland finally came together and decided to implement group violence intervention, starting with the problem analysis, because they knew without a problem analysis, there was going to be a perpetuation of a narrative of who is committing the violence without solid, hardcore, concrete data. Some of the narratives that are pushed out there is that, oh, these are just drug dealing, gang banging folks, just a very general view. But as Thomas said from his research and other researchers, when you really study your city, you do a comprehensive view, what's going on in your city, you're really going to notice it's only a very small percentage of your people who are committing the violence. But you won't know that until you do the data. That is so critical and that's so important. That's what Oakland did and that's what other cities are doing to really zero in on what's happening. Outside of that, they decided to, part of the GVI strategy is to engage in respectful conversation, call-ins, custom notifications. Stacey may touch on how they do that in New Haven as well. They also call together, this is all part of the strategy, social service providers, and even with law enforcement, because we can't do it without law enforcement. We're not saying, nix law enforcement. No, this is a partnership. This is a strategy together with law enforcement. It was a focused approach, which included training on procedural justice and strategies to increase police and community relationships. And then also part of this GVI strategy is making sure you include city leaders, which is where in Oakland, where we saw that they engaged in weekly shooting reviews, coordination meetings, and even looked at performance reviews within over a year. So this was a citywide strategy where everyone was invested, everyone came together, and everyone worked together, using often with the social service providers, a trauma-informed approach also. They were able together and collectively to reduce their homicides. Now, of course, we see within 2021, the increase of violence everywhere in big cities, because you got a gun violence, which is a public health crisis, and then you got COVID, which is a public health crisis. So together, that's going to be a really blossoming situation. But we do encourage you all to consider that moving forward, hopefully we're coming, into, that's hopefully passing us by, but we do hope that y'all consider looking at this strategy. This is one of several strategies out there, looking at nationally, but we do see some evidence in some cities. Louisville, Kentucky is one city that is working on a strategy this year, as well as we see Philadelphia. They're in their second iteration of their GVI model, making it a little bit more broader than they did in previous times. So they're trying it again there. Stockton, California, Baltimore is still working on theirs. And then of course, New Haven, which I've had the opportunity to sit in with Stacey and his team at Project Longevity, and their virtual call-ins. Of course, some places have had to modify during COVID, but they still make sure that they included that true implementation of this model, even with modifications during the COVID time. So without further ado, I want to turn it over and bring in my wonderful partner so he can talk to you guys a little bit more about how New Haven handles their group violence intervention strategy in the hopes that Richmond can look at what they do there. That doesn't mean you have to follow it solely, but perhaps there are some things that you all can adopt and take from their implementation.
Good afternoon, all. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Proceed.
Okay, I need to turn my video off, so hopefully I will not freeze. So let me proceed. Thank you for your invitation. My name is Stacy Spell. I am the program manager for Project Longevity New Haven. That's located in New Haven, Connecticut. And Connecticut, we have 3 GVI sites. We have New Haven, Bridgeport, as well as Hartford, with a 4th site, Waterbury, to come online in 2022. Project Longevity New Haven is a group gang gun violence reduction initiative out of the U.S. Attorney's Office. I am housed in the U.S. Attorney's Office, paid by state funds from the state of Connecticut Office of Policy and Management. And we have built a successful collaboration in that the collaboration is not only with just law enforcement, but also building that collaborative effort and creating a coalition that is made up of community members, of law enforcement, city government, non-traditional leaders, the likes, because the motto is that, and all of us working together, that we will save lives. Now, Project Longevity New Haven has 2 missions. Its primary mission is to reduce gun violence. Its secondary mission is to reconcile the community to police and police to community. For too long, systemically and historically, especially communities of color, have had a very rough relationship with law enforcement. If we are to be successful in moving forward, we have to repair those past ills and move forward, building on police legitimacy. Because when we work together, it builds that legitimacy. It brings community empowerment, because we need the community to be a part of this. Keep in mind, it was said earlier that law enforcement cannot arrest their way out of the situation. The only way that we are going to get out of the situation in today's times is that we are going to have to find unity, not only among the clergy and church groups, but community of all parts. Everybody has to play a role in this. It is a focused, deterrence-driven model, meaning that we do not just target everyone with a red bandana or a blue bandana. There is a collaboration between probation, between parole, between local law enforcement, between state law enforcement, between federal law enforcement agencies. We want to focus in strictly on Pastor Hodge. We don't want to focus in on everyone else in the room. We just want to focus on what Ralph Hodge is doing and those associated with him. In the past, what we saw was that as a result of homicides and shootings, especially in communities of color, the police would blanket an area. And in their attempt to quell it by arresting everyone, all they did was alienate those folks. You're not going to build allies by alienating them. So focused deterrence is a key part of it. Project Longevity is a data-driven initiative. And I can't speak enough that in order to be successful, you have to have a clear, transparent, and definitive relationship with your police department, because your police department has the data that's going to drive your initiative. The police departments or law enforcement will be the ones that will be able to conduct the focused deterrence. But more importantly, we want to make sure that those of us in the community are working in partnership with the police department so that we can build greater community engagement, and greater community ownership. In New Haven, we achieve these successes by two ways. First, we can have what's called a call-in, which is a mandated presentation that lasts no longer than an hour, that are to designated attendees that have been selected by parole and probation because they are still at risk of me. You can hear me? Yes. Thank you. So the call-in is the first thing. And at that call-in, the messaging is that we need you safe, alive, and not locked down, that our communities are better off when you are a part of it, that your families do better when you are a part of it. That same messaging is utilized in what's called a custom notification, where I show up at the door of Pastor Ralph Hodge. Pastor Hodge, your game is coming up quite a bit. And that we can give you a hand up. We can offer a hand up. That means, so if you have educational requirements, you want a career training, you want to become a carpenter, electrician, HVAC technician, whatever it be, a truck driver, a chef, we will help you achieve those goals. If you need immediate help with your families, your children need uniforms, you need groceries, whatever the small ask that may be, we step into that gap and we help fill it. And hopefully changing their trajectory and giving them a sustainable wage, putting them in a position so that they're able to make a livable wage and sustain it that will empower change for their families and them. That is the way out of changing this trajectory of past gun violence. In New Haven, we have seen traditionally, going back to the 20 years ago, where our homicides were always 34 and above. We have cut that in half. In 2017, we had 7 homicides total in the city of New Haven. And that's for a population of 135,000. That is historical. I say all that to show you that this methodology works. We utilize the ceasefire methodology out of the National Network of Safe Communities. I'm done. Thank you. I hope you heard everything.
Sorry about that. We're gonna all chip in and get Stacy better Wi-Fi. Just kidding. So now I want to introduce, first I thank Tiffany for a great presentation. I thank Stacy for sharing. I hope you heard some really good, important stuff. We're now going to have our final panelist, our third brother, James Wynn from the BREAD organization in Columbus. That's a sister organization. RISC is part of a group called the Direct Action Research Training Organizations. And we've got social justice groups all over the city. He's in Columbus, and I'm going to ask Brother Wynn to fill us in on some details about what his organization called BREAD did and how they were able to work on some stuff. So let him talk right now.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share this afternoon. As Mr. Hodge said, I'm a member of the BREAD organization, a sister organization to RISC. Unfortunately, in Columbus, Ohio, we're also plagued with homicides. Prior to setting an all-time high, a record high last year, we had 175 homicides in 2020. Prior to that, in the previous 5 years, we had averaged about 111 in the previous 5 years. Tragically, we're on pace right now to break last year's shameful record. We already have 167 homicides, and we got over 2 months left in this year. So I'm going to tell you a story what BREAD did about it going back 5 years ago. We approached the city of Columbus after hearing from our members about their loved ones being killed in senseless acts of violence. And we had conducted our research and we determined a solution to reducing the gun violence in our community 5 years ago. We determined that the National Network for Safe Communities, a national expert with over 25 years of experience in GBI of reducing gun violence, evidence-based program in reducing gun violence led by David Kennedy, was a solution. So we met with the Department of Safety for the city of Columbus, and they agreed with us that there was a need to reduce gun violence in our community. And they said, hey, listen, we're familiar with the strategy by David Kennedy. Matter of fact, we read his book, Don't Shoot, and some other publications, and they agreed with the strategy. And they were impressed with the results that it produced. However, they resisted contracting with the NNSC, the National Network for Safe Communities. They gave us a song and dance about a budget, a shortfall, whatever it may be. But they actually said they felt they could implement the same strategies from within the Department of Safety. And so based on that, they created what they call the Safe Neighborhood Initiative. So in 2017, Columbus launched the Comprehensive Neighborhood Safety Strategy. And according to the press conference that the mayor had, it included feedback from the community, insight from law enforcement, proven practices from other cities, along with federal, county, and community resources. So they kicked off this initiative and actually had their first call-in. Stacy Spell talked about the call-ins. In 2018, Columbus had the first ones, and they invited Brad to attend the call-in. And they did experience some success. They had 2 call-ins in 2018. They had some success. 63% of the people they called in did not reoffend. However, they were not able to make contact with the key influencers within the larger violent groups. As a result, that really lessened the impact of the initiative. Now, during the fall of 2019, our members in Bread were still talking about hearing gunshots at all times of day and night. Loved ones were still subjected to gun violence. So we went ahead and contacted the Department of Safety again in 2020. We wanted to get an update on the initiative that the city had created, that Safe Neighborhood Initiative. What we discovered was that the program had gone dormant. They hadn't had call-ins in about a year, and no notices had been given out. Now, prior to our meeting with the Department of Safety, we had contacted all the key players. We contacted the U.S. Attorney, the county prosecutor, the lead judge in the initiative. And they all said, listen, we're ready to participate, but nobody had contacted us. We participated a couple times, and we're ready to be involved, and we just haven't heard from anybody. So at that point, we stressed with the Department of Safety that they needed to contract with the national expert that we had recommended 3 years ago, NNSC, because we needed some fidelity to the program. So after we went back and forth, they agreed to an initial contract to have the problem analysis. Unfortunately, the city's failure to contract with the national expert initially when we pressed them in 2016, because they had a track record of reducing homicides upwards of 50%, it really costs about 50 lives, we calculated, 50 lives a year for each of the 3 years that they failed to implement that strategy, as they tried it on their own, because they're pretty smart people, which they are. But I guess the question is, what price can you attach to one life, let alone 50 each year, along with the traumatic effect that it leaves on families and also the community? So the city's the city was not successful due to a couple things. The infrastructure that they put in place could not sustain the initiative. It really lacked the fidelity of the successful model. Everything that David Kennedy does is not in the book. And I guess the city of Columbus found that out. And they treated this just like another program. And GBI is not another program. GBI really is a framework created which allows for a different approach to policing. It's a way to legitimize police within the community, to build trust and positive interactions with the community. It also reduces trauma and victimization within the community. And it also allows a way out for those people most prone to become either a victim of violence or a perpetrator of violence. And it focuses on those few members of the community that unfortunately has people believing, well, this is a dangerous neighborhood over here, that's a dangerous neighborhood over there, rather than it's just a neighborhood. It just happens to have a few dangerous people who live there. But the hope we have in Columbus for GBI is that the fact that it's going to be done right this time with fidelity, that it's going to impact the key influential leaders within the 17 violent groups that they just completed our problem analysis in the spring. And they identified 17 active violent groups in Columbus, which totals 450 people that they identified. That equals 0.05% of the population. A very, very small part of the population is responsible for a great deal of the violence. But the hope is that we're going to give these folks an opportunity to change their life, give them a way out. They'll be, as Stacy said, they're going to walk them through how to change their life. So as an organization, Bread is hopeful. As a matter of fact, in July, we met with the core GBI team that they have hired this past July. They've hired the 3 core members. We had a meeting with them, Bread did, and they actually thanked Bread as an organization for being persistent in pushing the city to contract with the NNSC. And they said, listen, you're putting us in a position to impact the lives of those people who are caught up in violence. And they were just excited about the opportunity they had before them to offer, as Stacy said, housing, jobs, and services that they need to give them a second chance. And of course, being a faith-based organization, we know all about second chances. As myself, I've had a second and third chance personally. They also felt with the GVI strategy, they had a roadmap for change to decrease the level of violence within the community. So right now, the core team is meeting weekly with the NNSC, going over steps that are needed for success. And here's what the project manager shared with us. She says, we are ensuring fidelity of the program to be implemented in Columbus, going to be starting this fall. And so as an organization, we left that meeting feeling reassured that this time the city of Columbus got it right. Now, our church, we're located in the zip code with the highest number of homicides in Columbus year after year consistently. And we've had far too many funerals and try to comfort far too many families at our congregation. But we actually remain steadfast in ending the violence. And I realize that Richmond is experiencing the same tragic loss of life that Columbus is. But know this, Richmond, your city is depending on you to work to make this initiative a reality in Richmond. Thank you for the opportunity you've given me today to share. Appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We did a few minutes, 7 minutes for questions. If you have any questions for the panelists, well, I'll ask you to do, if you have a question, I'll ask you to come up to the podium so they can see you, and we'll unmute them so they can respond. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. App, Tiffany? Tiffany's right here, you can catch her, or any of the panelists that are on Zoom. Any questions? Come on, sir.
Just speaking here, Tiffany can hear me. I got a lot of this.
Okay, good.
In the early 1990s, we had a homicide rate in Richmond that approached 150 to 160 a year. We then started a federal initiative called Project Exile. We locked up tons and tons of black men. And the homicide rate dipped to as low as 30. Many people suggested that we were throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Lock them up, everybody who had a gun, and we did reduce the homicide rate. but the cost of a
Too great.
generation of young men that were locked up, many of them with mandatory minimum sentences. Is this program similar?
No.
Tell me how it's different specifically.
Well, in the Project Exile, without going into too many details, but I think you know, it was just a lock them up approach. Our approach with this is that first of all, we do the problem analysis. Where's the problem? And then we provide intervention. We're not trying to lock some up. If Ralph Hodge is involved in gangs or guns, Ralph Hodge has got an issue. He's got an issue maybe with housing, mental health, post-traumatic stress disorder. He needs help. He doesn't need to be incarcerated. He needs help. Our job is to identify who's the people in our community that need help and provide systematic intervention towards them. That's the main goal. Project Exile locked you up if you had a gun. It didn't ask you what your problem was. It didn't ask you what your housing issue was. It didn't ask you what your family issue. It locked you up and sent you away. That's what Project Exile did. That's why I said on Channel 6, we don't want anything to do with a Project Exile type of program. We haven't even done the problem analysis yet in the city. That's the first thing that we have to do.
One follow-up question. Cost is $250,000 for a 2-year program, is that right?
I think so. I don't want to actually quote any dollar figures because I'm not the expert on that.
Are there any law enforcement officers in Dallas or in New Haven or in Oakland who are in support of this program? I noticed that we don't have a chief law enforcement officer for Richmond here right now.
We asked every law enforcement from federal on down to be here at this program. We've spoken to them several times. We've asked them to come. We thought it was extremely important. We asked all the city council to come. We asked everyone. And the people that you see are the people that said, yes, they are concerned and they will be there.
Pastor, I appreciate all that you're doing. You're doing a great job. I love it. Are there any law enforcement officers that are supporting this?
Well, there's one right next to you.
I understand that. The sheriff.
There's your Commonwealth attorney right there. You can ask her. She's right there. She's here. And Stacey Smith. Okay.
You can ask Stacey to speak.
Stacey, can you speak? Let me unmute. I'm sorry, I'm juggling.
Yes. So I am proud to say that here in New Haven, the GVI methodology is advocated from the top down as well as the bottom up. So all of my partners that speak with me in this
Start over. We couldn't hear you.
Yes. So law enforcement is the key integral part of it. Law enforcement views, I know for here in New Haven, we view an arrest as a failure. If I've spoken to Ralph Hodge 3 times, I've spoken with his auntie, I've spoken with his wife, all right? I've spoken with his family and I've tried to draw all of them into the process. If he fails to listen and I fail to communicate, or my partners, we fail to communicate to him that we can help you, and he still goes out and gets involved in the streets, we failed. We have to look at changing the dynamics of our engagement. We have to change the dynamics of success, because this population, they don't succeed as most of us would. It might take 2 or 3 chances for them to accomplish what they need. But law enforcement is a key integral part.
Any other questions? There we go.
I got a question, Pastor.
Yes, speak loud.
Is New Haven a city that's been gentrified like Oakland? And is that part of the decline? I noticed they said Oakland about 5 times. I was wondering. That was my question too. Yeah.
No, New Haven hasn't been one of those cities that
can come up to the front and look here. Come on over here. Yeah, that we can see.
I think you muted us more here. No, you didn't.
No, they can hear you. Yeah, speak to you.
Who am I talking? Stacy?
Just right there.
Okay. Stacy, is Oakland or New Haven a city that's been gentrified? And does that have anything to do with the same program? Because I noticed Richmond is being gentrified. So are y'all going around to those cities? And is that
No. So in New Haven, we have not. We are watching the wave of gentrification come in. So, but I must admit, the areas that are being challenged, say since 2020, since the pandemic, not only communities such as New Haven that don't have this wave of gentrification, but communities large and small across the countries are seeing an escalation in gun violence. Small towns are having incidents of gun violence where they've never had before. But gentrification is not a factor. I hope that helps.
Not affect at all.
But you see the same rise in gun violence in cities that don't have gentrification or have that. Other questions? Yes.
So, because of programs such as Project Exile and a lot of other well-documented inequity that has taken place in policing, I'm wondering, because of the collective trauma that most of us experience at the hands sometimes of law enforcement, what is it specifically that these programs do to rebuild trust?
I'll let our analysts.
Is that for me, Reverend Hodge?
The question, hopefully you can hear me. She asked a question. Make sure I say it correctly. Say it for me again.
Oh, yeah. As Senator Morrissey mentioned, Project Exile, right? That was horrific for our communities. In the long run, can you hear me now, or should I pull this?
No, I'm just bringing it to you. Here you go. Yeah, I think that was nothing.
So, there are very well documented cases of inequity in policing, in Richmond too. And because most of us feel some degree of collective trauma, I wonder what is being done to specifically rebuild trust between, law enforcement agencies and the communities.
So for me, it's bringing every opportunity possible to bring law enforcement and community into the rooms together. There's something about the sense of fellowship. So when we fellowship and we break bread, whether it's just bread and butter or us convening and being able to speak to one another. Can you hear me? Thumbs up, you can hear me? There is something about convening a sense of fellowship that enables new relationships to be started. So as you said, systemically and historically, communities of color have suffered trauma at the hands of law enforcement. We are in a time where we need to reset those relationships. Recently, I want to say 2 weeks ago here in New Haven, we had what's called a Cops and Ballers basketball tournament. This is a basketball tournament made up of mixed teams of police and young men from the community. This gives young men a chance to deal with police in circumstances that they would not normally do. We also utilize book clubs where we will have a discussion on a book. I also utilize, as I said, anything, whether it's a dialogue, whether it's a cookie caper. Was we brought about maybe 30 police officers and 2 times as many community members to come together, bake cookies, have a competition, all having different recipes, and then to have a dialogue afterwards. And one of the overwhelming things that came out of it, there was a sister, older woman there who said the police officers that she met, they reminded her of her sons. So we have to go about creating opportunities that bring police and community together, where we can establish some clear and honest communication. If we've had trauma in the past, let us speak to the trauma. And also, I can't say this enough, we have to make sure that in Project Longevity New Haven, we have a component that's always looking to address the trauma that's going on in our community. One of the problems I find, especially as being a Black man, is that in culture, we are part of a culture that does not is not receptive to mental health treatment, that you are viewed as a victim and not a victor. Whereas in the childhood trauma and the trauma that has gone on in the past, we need to address it. If we continue to let the trauma go on, we will continue to still have those same behaviors. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The big reason we asked folks to come today is first to start the conversation. We've had a lot of conversations, but we know there's something specifically that has to be done first. No matter what gun violence prevention strategy you use, without a rigorous problem analysis of your city and community, you are shooting darts all over the place. We need that vigorous problem analysis done in our city. Even if we do a different program, it still needs to be data-driven. It still needs to be based on facts. It still needs to be based on understanding how community crime actually happens in our community without not just doing blanket narratives. So what we're asking, and risk members are going to do, and if you want to join us, you are more than willing to join. We believe the problem is urgent. And so we have asked the mayor for this, and we're going to ask the mayor again. So we're asking, I'm going to ask that risk clergy, if risk clergy here, would you stand? And I believe all our risk clergy here have already agreed to send the mayor a letter saying that we need to start that rigorous problem analysis. And if you are in agreement with that, risk clergy, would you raise your hand? All of our risk clergy here are in agreement with that. Now, we've got Maurice Washington. He spoke. I'm gonna let Maurice stand. Maurice, just introduce yourself again and share then where you are with the problem analysis.
I'm Maurice Washington, representing Real Life. You asked where I'm at with it?
Yeah.
From my understanding, I was attracted to it because it has the analysis, and then you come to certain individuals and bring along the healthcare with the mental health and the community, and come to them with, and like we see that you have a problem, and you might be subject to gun violence, and how can we help you? And that's what, from my understanding, that's what I was attracted to. But and I feel like me being in the community, like that could have helped me in my past. If I had like some people coming to me for help, and just putting a microscope on me and coming to me for help, give me an opportunity to navigate about a certain situation.
We thank you for being here, Maurice. We appreciate your support. Our clergy has stood, and our community members have stood. If you are one of our officials at the table and you're interested in writing a letter or communicating with City Council or City Hall and the mayor's office with getting a vigorous problem analysis done, stand or speak now. Okay, I'll let Sheriff Irving speak first.
One of the things I want to talk about, one great job about it's not like we're not doing some of these things.
No,
there are some of us that are doing these things and are doing these things together. It's as if we've not heard of police and communities engaging with one another. Yep. And we're doing it. And we're doing that in spaces and places that people don't see on a regular basis. It's as if we're saying that the only way to solve this problem is to do another analysis, in which we've done analysis in the past about where the crime comes from, who's doing the crime. We know our targeted crime areas, and we know the people in those areas as to what's going on. And pretty much we know why some of these things are happening. So we shouldn't act like we don't know why we have the crime in the communities that we have. And one problem analysis, whether we use this group that you guys are talking about or use another group, we have people in places that we can join and commune with each other to figure out what we have to do. We just got to start doing some things.
And we don't disagree. What I think is, what we want to do with the problem analysis is put everybody on the same page. Because I don't know what the average age of a shooter is in the city. I don't know who the average age. My group doesn't know what to do. I think we're all not working on the same page. Our goal is to do a problem analysis to get everyone on the same page and bring everybody to the table.
But if this information is already out here, why not we seeking this information from each
We
other?
ask.
Because we don't talk to each other enough. To
Well,
find out this
has there been a problem analysis done in our city last year?
Yes.
Where is it?
I mean, when you say problem analysis, I like Sheriff Urban said, we know people that
Well,
are.
Well, have we directed? How many top offenders do we have? What number is that?
Well, I got a bunch of them in my jail.
Yeah. Well,
So right now I got about 600 of them.
yeah, I think the issue is that have murders gone up? Yes, they have.
Yes, they have. Have we asked to see the information that's there? Because the mayor just started a program. He had to get that information from somewhere. So have we asked for that information? Or do we need somebody else to ask for that information from him that we can get information? Because we're putting.
If there's been a problem analysis done in the city, we would love to have that information.
And I'll work to find
if it hasn't been done, we're asking, can we get it done? Because it's something we think we can be done in a couple of months. It's not something we think it takes 2 or 3 years. So if it has been done, I would like someone after this meeting to give it to us. So that's what we would like. So if it has been done, that's great. If it hasn't been done, do we agree that we should do one?
Yeah.
That needs to be, if it has not been done, we need to do one and figure out where we're going.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So if there has been one done, yes, Delegate Back.
I don't think, and I hope you're not saying the only thing that you want is something that can be handed to you.
No,
I think also
we want the date.
Have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's what drew me to this meeting, is my conversation with Cole. And so I think the full conversation, full scope, where the sheriff is saying, if there's a problem with anyone having communication, certainly she can help with that communication, and certainly the Commonwealth Attorney, collective teaching. Where we are looking at, and I'm not speaking for Joe or Hashmi, but I think what we're looking at is how we can support, particularly financially, because right now you're going to see a lot of, and he mentioned it, there's going to be funds coming down from the feds, and we have somewhat of a surplus on the state level.
I believe the state already allotted for this. I believe we should.
There's more.
Yeah, the city already allotted for us to do it.
So what I'm saying is, I don't want us to go down. I don't want anyone to go down the road too far without each other.
Right.
Also, I would love to see a short-term plan and a long-term plan, because a long-term plan incorporates housing, and it starts with housing.
Work on that.
Let me have
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, we've been talking about housing for a minute. I think what
But let's talk to.
Well, that's the thing. We're not on the same page. We want to get on the same page. There's no turf with us. Yeah.
Right. We can't be on the same page. How do we expect these guys out here on the street to be on the same page?
So let's get on the same page. Let's get the problem analysis done, or everybody get on the same page. Anyone else besides Delegate Back in support? Okay. I want to get the table first, then I'll go over here. Yes.
I was at the table in Boston when the 10-point coalition was created by my boss. I was at the table when my wife wrote the Office of Faith-Based Community. I've watched all the pastors in the country do the dance of trying to put stuff together. I was in the room. My mentee worked for George W. Bush and ran the office. I created, not Cure Violence, I created Violence Interrupters, ex-offenders leading the movement. We've been doing the work for 22 years. We want to help you.
We want you in.
And what I'm saying is, where at the table do I see the people who are going to do the work? Because at the end of the day, nothing against any of the pastors, they're not going to the hood knocking on my door. When I used to have that gun, because you weren't coming, I wasn't listening to you, you did come. Where's the people who's going to hit the ground and do the work? Because if they're not in the room, you can do all the analysis you want. Who's going to hit the ground? And if you ain't getting in front of a gun, then you ain't going to deal with it. And I don't, nothing against the people in the room. I'm not seeing the people who are physically going into the projects or into the prisons or into the penitentiaries or into the alleys or 2 o'clock in the morning in a club and dealing with it in real time. You're going to need that component. The analysis ain't going to help that.
Yeah.
You need those people first.
That's in the implementation.
No soldiers.
Yeah, that's in the implementation of any program. And we always say that violence interrupters are key. Every time I've had a chance to talk anything about that.
Where are
Right here, sir.
Yeah.
they? You're volunteering.
Yeah. We've invited them here. Yeah. So anyone else at the table? I saw another delegate they wanted to share. I'm going to get to her.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't mind.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on. I couldn't see you, so I'm gonna introduce myself to you. I really appreciate you because I get to that earlier saying, if we continue to wait months, like that gentleman said, that's more deaths. We have shootings and killings every week in Mosley. We had a safe zone in Mosley. A shooting happened at Red Accommodation Street as we were having a safe zone. And so the challenge is we continue to meet, but nobody is on the ground. So everybody meeting, but nobody is on the ground. Nobody is pulling up on Culture Street. Nobody is pulling up on Rosecrest. Nobody is pulling up on Accommodation Street where the babies are literally killing themselves. And it doesn't start with the babies. It don't start with housing. It starts with education because they're dropping out of school left and right because the education that they get here in Richmond is not applicable for them. In other words, it's not showing me a way that I can get out of poverty, right? And so they won't do what they got to do as far as that money and shooting up guns if that's what they see, right? Because at the end of the day, they have to get out of poverty. But then the experts that we talked about, the experts, and I would love to talk to them, but it's a little bit different in Richmond. Because in Richmond, our babies have the right to have guns. They're legal. They are legal. So at 21, I had the right, or Coletto or Anthony Irving, you can stop me, or I had the right to have an AR-15. In them other states, I don't. So I could go ahead and buy an AR, and I could buy all these guns like it's nothing. So that's different than other states. Also, the gentleman talked about dangerous neighborhoods and dangerous kids. It's under-resourced neighborhoods and under-resourced kids. Our babies don't have nothing to do. The community centers are closed. During the pandemic, the hoops were taken down in the hoods. The violence was going to increase. Another thing, Pastor Hodges, I commend you. There is no gun violence prevention program that's going to be effective in the city of Richmond if there's not 90+% black men. I'm sorry. It's just really not. You have to be able to go up to these babies in the trenches, right, and tell them and talk to them. A lot of people not going to do it, but you can't go as other than that and say, listen, this is why you're supposed to be able to put down a gun, because they're not going to put it down. You feel me? And going to jail and going to cemetery, that's already in their head. We got to change that truth because that's their truth. From the time that this is their truth, the ones that's in gun violence. Another thing, they talked about the small percentage. It may be 200 kids that we touch in Richmond that would stop the gun violence, and there's 230,000 citizens in Richmond. Yep. I mean, 200+ citizens, if we touch them, we can stop the gun violence. It's not really a lot. I know you said 600 of your babies.
She hit the greatest point, is that we can identify those 200. I'm not just give and take a few numbers and target them with the right kind of intervention, whether it's housing, whatever. We can change the city. That's what we're saying. Because we came to the mayor 2020 and said, these programs put violence interrupters on the street and support violence interrupters and support and give them money so they can be full-time violence interrupters on the street. So they don't have, trying to get off their job and then trying to mentor somebody. No, that's their job with these 200-300 folk. We talked about that. So the thing about this, we've been talking about it for 2 years because no one wants to, let's get it going. We're ready to get it going. But we know we can't get it going without the data, without real data in place. So we know this is where we need to go. Because at risk, we're just pulling the problem out. We know it can be done. I see my friend right here. Go ahead, Rachel. Speak up a little loud and drip your minutes. Yeah, stand there. You go.
So everybody knows, like, and then all the funds that were the police, right? When I look around this room, I know we can, we can make things change. Like you said, these guys, and I'm in this community, these guys are leaders.
That's right.
The people that push buttons, they can influence somebody, to shoot somebody up, these are leaders. But it does no good if these funds that are released are
don't get down to you.
Like most people didn't even know they could get their rent paid. That's not my responsibility or other young, uneducated people. This money, all these funds that were released are sitting in these rooms. So if you want to make a difference, like she said, nobody's gonna listen to anybody. That's the truth. So each have access to people in the community. It's your job to teach them. If this guy's energy is like misdirected, and you know to get to the street, then you take them, teach them, how to get legal, set up a foundation, do the work with them, and that will change things. Like, it's frustrating because y'all can do a whole nother analysis.
And that's why we're trying to work from the inside out. We're trying to work with these folks that are inside or connected to the people from the inside to the outside to get them on the ground. That's what we're doing. That's why I brought this guy. This is what we're doing, and put the money together to get these guys, put them to work, put them to work in a positive way. So there are ways to do this.
I think there are.
You had this conversation one time before. So we just waiting to expand on what's the next steps that we need to do on a smaller level. Even if we can't get all of their money from up there, what can we do with the small funds that we have now?
Let me provide some clarity. My statement was a short-term plan and a long-term plan. The long-term plan, I argue it all day long, starts with housing.
I don't disagree.
I understand education is important. I'm a former school board member, former teacher, coach. I want to push education. But when you have saturation of poverty in our city, not just our city, but in our region, you break that saturation of poverty and make sure those individuals have the resources they need. You don't have to knock on their door and ask what they want and what they need.
And we don't disagree with you on that.
And I just want to make clear. And they're not going to schools that are saturated with poverty. We're 90% are on free and reduced lunch, where on the other side of the region, it's 2%.
And Delegate Barry, we would love to have that housing conversation with you. We've had it.
And all I'm saying is it's all together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Pastor, how you doing?
Hey, you got 30 seconds. I got to close up our Zoom thing. Got 30 seconds.
One of the things, first of all, there is no cookie cutter answer.
John, speak up.
First of all, there is no cookie cutter answer to any of these problems because, different people have different reasons why different things occur.
But we do know that violence it's very predictable in a lot of cities. And it's very predictable.
And I'm not knocking.
Yeah, we want to make sure.
I think you can, predict locations and even sometimes conditions that does that. But I think one of the big things here, and I want to piggyback on what the sheriff said, one of the things is that so much is already being done. And I got over 40 years law enforcement experience, and I've seen every program existed, Project Exile, all of the other programs that existed throughout the city of Richmond. And I've seen hundreds of analyses. They do these things, and where do they go? They do an analysis and it stops somewhere in that process. And I'm not knocking any of those things either, but I think some of us with experience in here can tell you where the crime is. We can tell you the average age, all those things you already want to know. We can it's already done because we live it. It's not something that we work at. We live it every day. We see it every day. We see it down to the ship. The piece that's missing here, and you guys, I applaud each one of you pastors that's involved in this, because I think that's definitely an important piece to it. But we need schools should be here. Social service should be here. But I'm talking about this room should be packed, man. This is one of the most important issues.
Well, we couldn't pack it out because of COVID right now. That's the reason. That's the reason. That's the reason. Yeah.
Because this is an important issue, and you have to have all of these agencies together addressing these issues along with young people. These young folks here is a handful of, and he's exactly right. These are folks that can make a difference because a lot of these folks on the street ain't listening to me. No. I'm an old man too. Yeah. But they're gonna listen to him. They're gonna listen to this young lady who's out here, talking to them. Those are the folks we got to get to spearhead this. And then what all of the rest of us need to be doing is making sure they do have the fight.
And see, what our argument,
they do have those things.
And what our argument is that we want those things to be based on the analysis and the plan developed based on that analysis. So that that analysis done, that plan space that, okay, these groups need money. These groups need resources. These groups need whatever case. That's what the analysis is just the very beginning. It's not the plan. You base the plan based on the data. That's what it is. The analysis isn't the plan. That's just the data that tells you what your plan should be and what groups and what people you should be targeting. That's what we're saying. We said that's just the very first step.
And I think what most of us said, we have it.
Yeah.
And we've had it over and over and over again.
And
I'd
so
like to say something.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about the crime rate or the gun violence still going up. We're not being effective. That's what we're saying. We're not targeting anyone's program and what you're doing. And I think we need to come off that high horse. Because if we got all these programs and we are doing all this, why is the gun violence still with this? We're talking about being effective. That's what the problem now is to help us to do. So I think we need to stop saying, I got this program. Fine, they can all work together, but the problem still exists. What we're saying is we're not being effective. The problem now is to help us to be a lot more effective.
Tiffany, can you speak? Hold on. Tiffany, can you speak to why it's important to do that problem analysis? Are you able to speak to that?
So I'm probably going to echo the same thing that you said.
Okay, stand up. You can stand right there. I got you.
Okay. I'm just going to say the same thing that you all have already been saying. Even though you all have already done that in the past, it sounds like not everybody's on the same page, right? I think that's the whole goal. That's just step one, right? Just do that, see where everything's at, because if your last analysis was last year, year before last, it'd be great to collect the data right now, what's been happening now, so that the next step is you guys come together in the next step in GVI strategy is the next step in that plan, right? It's coming together, pulling the providers together. Because the next step, once you do that analysis, then you have to incorporate who's going to be at the table to be the people that are doing call-ins and who's going to be the people doing custom. Like, it's a full out plan. That's just a very small step. You know what I'm saying? So if you all in the city want to get the whole plan, yes, that's a minor step, but do that and then know that if you're going to incorporate the whole strategy, just like Stacey was saying, you have to implement it well. That's just one piece. But I think to your point, if no one has access to what your complete strategy is, that everybody got to be on the same page. So I'm not going to say the same thing.
Yeah,
that's all the other cities that we've been working with. They do the same thing, even though they have done analysis in the past. Because that city is like, all right, we're moving forward with GVI. We're starting over. We're doing this analysis because we know our next step in GVI is we got to pull together these call-ins and custom notifications, those parts of the full out plan. So that's it.
All right. One more question, then we got to lock it up. Speak up just loud.
Okay, I'm loud. Good afternoon. I had a question regarding GVI and other places. After you do the collection of data, I've been on that task, so you get back to stop on something.
Okay.
Share. But I want to know about children, elementary, K through 5. I'm a former RPS employee for 20 years, and I want to know what we're going to do about children. Like, what does GVI do for baby, K through 5? Because that's where it starts. Everybody wants to do secondary because they can't actually get their hands on guns. But as we listen and as we learn, as we observe, elementary kids are getting their hands on guns. So what are we going to do about that for those children, like K through 5 children, as far as teaching them and catching them at an early age?
Yeah, I think you can implement an earlier strategy. I think for our discussion today is that we're saying, where's the majority of the gun violence happening? With who? And targeting that particular group with intervention. That's not to say, because what we always say is and in both. It's not just one thing or the other. It's all of these things. So what I'm going to say is that's another discussion. It's a great discussion to have. We're going to have, but for today's conversation, our goal is where's the majority of the gun violence happening?
But I'm saying other people in other states, other cities have done it.
Well, I'm not dismissing it. What I'm saying, just for today, that's only where our discussion is going. You got a good question, but I'm saying it's for another session. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Yeah. Not that it's not a good question at all. Yeah. So what we're going to do from this point, because we're just a little bit over, is that the first thing we're trying to do is to get that problem analysis done so that we can develop a plan based on that data. That's what that's what we're asking the mayor to do. That's what we've been asking the mayor to do, to implement. We're trying to get started. And we know you can't get started without that. We think it's an easy ask. We think it's an easy thing to get done. And the issue is why not do it so we can get started, so we know what groups, what organizations how we can intervene in our city. I'm going to ask us to give our closing prayer. I think Pastor Bond, is she still here? And their experts are here, able to talk to you after the session's over.
Well, today has been rich discussion. We thank God for it. I want to start off by ensuring all of you that I stand before you as clergy, but also as a professional within our criminal justice system. So please know that we just don't sit at the table, but most of the clergy that are here today are also ones that are in the community along with you. So we appreciate the partnership. So I wanted to clear that up because I know sometimes when we get dressed up, you don't think that we're out there, but these clothes do come off. So let us go to God. Almighty God, we come before you today. We come seeking direction, strength, and your guidance. God, we ask that you guide us towards peace and away from violence. Allow us to solve the problems in a constructive way rather than result in destruction and division, God. God, we pray right now for unity amongst the city of Richmond and the willingness of all of us to come together to stay committed in identifying a problem to not only stop the gun violence, God, but to strengthen this beloved city. God, we also pray for the countless victims of gun violence. God, we ask you to receive them into your loving souls, those that were killed, to care for those that were wounded, and to console the family members and friends of those that died. God, we ask that you be with the children that are now forced to grow without a parent, that you be with the parents that were forced to lay their children to the ground. God, help them all to feel the comfort in the world that seems like it's full of evil. But God, if we're honest, we're tired. We're tired of waking up, of hearing of another death due to gun violence. We're tired of the unwillingness to see this as an important issue. We're tired of those in position and power that refuse to work together to prevent a real change. We are tired that gun violence continues to be an issue that we talk about. God, we're tired that we refuse to live in a community and a world that refuse to accept the missional mandate to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. Although we may be tired, we must remain steadfast, and we will not quit, God. We also understand that the same tiredness, the same frustration, and the same sadness that we feel is the same that you feel after the struggles against injustice and the senseless killings within our community. Therefore, God, we ask that you motivate all the people in position to do more than just speak of the problem, but to act on the problem. We pray, God, that you open their eyes to see the profound impact that gun violence has on all of us. We ask that you disrupt, that you convict, that you push us towards to have the strength to do what is needed to do to solve this very serious problem. The violence must stop. God, we understand the urgency and the seriousness to come together and identify a solution to fix the problem. At this time, I want to ask for everyone that is gathered here today to stand. Your standing represents the 111 individuals that have lost their lives since February 2020 up until now due to gun violence. So God, as we stand together, allow our standing to represent our commitment to come together. Allow our standing to represent our commitment to love this community. God, we pray for our city. We pray for the communities. We pray for our leaders. God, we ask that you cover us, that you protect us, that you strengthen us and guide us towards ending gun violence. Let us all say amen together. Amen.